Hey there, Patreon family. Welcome to part 2 of our large painting here. We just completed part 1, which was this sky, and it took about an hour. If you missed that, that is up over on YouTube. If you'd like a link to that, you can find that in the same post that you found this one. But we're going to continue what we started here. I'm going to be working on the clouds down here at the bottom. We're going to talk about how they change as they get farther away from light. We're going to do a lot of detail work, and we're going to continue working with the reference photos, which you can download in, again, the post where you found this video. Now, this reference photo right here is for the middle of the painting. As you can tell, it's much more purple than what we had. The blue ink in my printer started to run out, so we got this instead. But that's okay, I don't need it for color anymore. We have all of the color established for the most part in the top of the painting. I'm just using this for shape and form. Then over here I have this reference photo, which will be for this block. So we're just going to continue. Now I'm going to take my palette, make sure that my brush is nice and damp, and I'm going to continue from this area this way. Now I'm going to start with some Mars Black. Remember, we're mixing in a bit of a darker area right here. And I'm going to try to mix that same pigment that I have around the outskirts that we used in the last portion of the painting. So that right there, it's a little bit too bright. I'll incorporate some more Mars Black and slowly just add that until we have the pigment we actually want. You can see that it's taking a little while, but that's okay. A lot of it more blue because it's getting quite desaturated. These are all the questions you need to ask yourself as you're mixing the pigment. So now I have what I want. I'm going to just kind of draw in the edges of my foreground. That way I don't go over anything I don't want to. And I have these fairly basic guidelines. Again, I'm okay to redraw all of our subjects. I just want to know where they are. It'll make that redrawing process significantly more simple. And then once I have those edges outlined that I want, I just start to work my way in. Let's go back, grab some more of that paint, head over here, do the same thing, start with my outlines. And you could use a significantly larger brush for this. We don't actually need any of this to have that very soft look, as we essentially just want a fairly full, fairly opaque application. It could be void of brush strokes, it could have brush strokes, but the rounded brush strokes that we generally use to render these clouds won't really be noticeable or needed here in the interior of these darker clouds. I'm just going back over these areas that we did before, making them a hint more thick. Cover more of this tree. The more tree we cover, the easier it will be to actually paint the tree. And I know that might sound a little backwards because now we can see the tree. If we paint over it, we can't. But if we don't paint over the edges of the tree, then we're very confined with how we're painting these branches. We won't be able to take any liberties or make any changes. So I'm going over portions of it, that way I can change the movements if I feel they need to be a little bit different to feel natural. So here I'm starting with a bit of a darker gray, and I'm applying this to the bottom, and then I'll let it blend up into a slightly lighter gray at the top. And this mixture is a bit more blue, so I'll just add that over to this side. Here I am using that same rounded stroke and application that we used before, so the round-headed brush still is serving a use, but you could do that with a different brush fairly successfully. Now I'll take more of that, and I'll kind of figure out where the top of this is, how it kind of correlates with that. Looks like this right here is kind of this top area. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect, but by using the reference photo, we have something that will give us at least an idea of how to continuously change things, and then we can play with it by ourselves, right? Make it our own. Need some more pigment. And I've mentioned in this very lesson that I don't really like mixing a lot of pigment at once, just because it makes it so you don't have to do it a lot. And that means you don't get the practice, and that means you don't kind of memorize these formulas and how to deal with these things. However, we need a lot of this darker bluish gray, so here I am mixing up a bit more than I normally would. There we go. Something else to watch out for is I have a lot of pigment here on my brush. This will no longer work well for details. It's a bit too messy, so if you need to do any details, scrape off the extra paint on your brush before you continue to proceed. Here you can see that it's actually quite dark in relation to what it's right beside, so I will brighten it. More titanium white. We'll give that a go. It's better, it needs to be a bit more blue. Try that. And that right there looks very close. We'll just make it a little bit brighter, a little bit more blue. And that right there is our actual pigment. So now we'll just spread this out. And it's up to you as to how dramatic you want this cloud to be. If you want it to be less dramatic, if you want it to blend in with the other clouds a little bit more, just take more titanium white, more primary blue, and look at that. It's significantly closer to what we have there. You can make it even more blue so it has more reflective light on it. And a lot of these clouds are actually going to have a highlight on them, so they'll go back and they'll be more defined in just a little bit. So they actually don't need to be that stark to stand out. And again, subtle clouds aren't a bad thing. But I think what I want is I want a bit of a heavy contrast over here. So I'm going to allow this to remain as dark as it is, and I'm going to progressively make my cloud a little bit lighter over here. Not because of how light is working through it, but just because the composition of the cloud itself, not the physical composition, but the kind of the inner workings of it, it'll be a bit more soft, it'll be a bit more transparent, it won't be as stark. So here you can see I'm just going back. I have a lot of really dark paint right there, so I'll need to make it even brighter in that area to compensate and mix. There's something that's quite blue. We'll just work our way around these trees. Again, drawing on my little edges. There we go. You know what? I think there was actually land right here. That's okay. You know what? I'll just draw on, and this is something we can all do. If you feel like you've gone over an area that you don't want to, just draw where you think that land is going to be with a value that's really going to stand out. So I'll just take some titanium white here, and I'll mark that. So this right here, that's land. Everything above is cloud. There we are. Continuously still going back to water so that my paint remains wet a little bit longer, so that I'm able to drag it farther so that I'm able to blend. Yes, it will make it semi-transparent, but we're working with so much paint at this point, covering such a surface area. It's okay if it's a little bit more damp than usual. There we go. It's also okay if your cloud has some areas that are a little more gray, some that are a little bit more blue. Generally, you want the back to be a bit more gray and the top to be a bit more blue, but having variation really isn't a bad thing. Just think about why you want that variation and make sure that there's reasoning and kind of context behind it. I'm thinking more blue here on the edges because it's a bit brighter. We'll have a bit more light working through. You'll see that blue on the other side. So here I'm just taking something that's slightly more blue than what we had, working it along the top, And I am making my clouds more dramatic than they are in the reference photo. I just think it'll be interesting. I personally like dramatic skies even when they are blue. So here, a bit more blue. Just working that around the tops and the edges, and we'll go back and we'll blend these edges of the clouds a bit later as well. And I'll just build it up slowly. You can see how soft that edge now looks with a bit of that light streaming through it. Neat little effect. There we go. And of course we drag down, we blend, do all of that good stuff. Now, if you look here on the reference photo, all of this right here has this highlight along the edge. So let's start working with that. I'm going to take some of our titanium white, some of our cobalt blue, mix that into our prior mixture, make sure it's nice and bright though. And let's pick an area. Let's work on this actually first because it's very definitive. Here you can see it sticks out. It's kind of it's in its own area. I'll work it around the top to begin with. Kind of wisps out that way. Has a little bit of a wispy effect down here. And again, I'm not following it exactly, but it's giving me enough to make it more realistic. And look here, you can see how bright that is. How bright that is. Right here, it's less. I made sure that area had a bit of a change, a bit of a difference. It does right here. The cloud actually works like this. It's a triangle. But this area is significantly less bright. So I'm just working this along the top. And I can blend it down in a couple areas if I'd like. Here it actually blends into the actual sky, which is really neat. Get some more of that highlight. Now here you can see it's kind of broken up into a bunch of little areas. So let's do that. I'll kind of insert a little line in there. And you'll need to go a little bit brighter because we are working on a darker area and it'll absorb that light pigment. But here we can work in some little clouds, have some fractures in the larger cloud that'll let light in. And I think we'll zoom in to do a bit more of this. So as you can see, I moved my reference photo right down here. And if you look at it, this arrow right here is that arrow right there. This highlight right here will be right there. And we have these really nice little highlights at the bottom that we're still yet to incorporate. So let's continue with the top ones, get well acquainted with how we're doing it, and then we can work our way inwards. So here I'm just mixing up more of that nice highlight, looking at this, coming up, creating that almost triangular look. It breaks off into a couple of pieces here. So I'll break this one off into a couple of pieces. There we have 3. The edge is almost the brightest area, so I'm making that a bit brighter. I'll look over at this, incorporate a bit more highlight into it as well. Lights surrounding it and it's working its way around the bottom. So I'm highlighting both. And then it looks like it comes up this little mound as well. Now the light's coming this way, so I think it'll catch more of the edges that are kind of protruding like this. And you can see how we're building layers. It looks like it's coming out. This area right here is in front of this area is in front of this area, and it's all in front of this bottom area as well. Now I'm going to increase the highlight right there a little bit. Again, I want it more subtle like it is here, but because we increased the highlight on both sides, we needed to make it a little bit brighter as well, just to make it all work together. And here, there aren't a lot of little stray pieces, but I'm going to throw in some stray pieces just to give it a little bit more motion and movement. There we go. It's a bit more interesting now. Now here we have these larger two humps. So I will start this one right here for that, and then it'll turn into this one right there. Now it's significantly lighter in the reference photo, so we'll take some more titanium white, work that onto our palette, cobalt blue. And I'm not really mixing into any extra Mars black right now because my brush already has so much pigment on it that it has some of that Mars black left. Mars black. A little bit of Sean Connery. I don't know if I'm old enough to do that accent, but what a great Bond, wasn't he? Anyways, here you can see that I'm still lightening this up a little bit. I can take some of this highlight, work it back over here again, have it subside in there, build this up, and you can see we're slowly just working these highlights in. Now there are these two little opening areas in here which are kind of interesting, which light is peeking through. So I'll paint those. And when I'm painting the opening in a cloud, generally I'll want the top to be a little bit sharper than the bottom. So this area, I'm going to use a fairly small round stroke, and the bottom, I'll go wide. That way it looks like the light is kind of leaking through. It's lightening up a lot of the bottom cloud area, but the top area can't have as much light coming through it. I'm making mine a bit more dramatic than in the reference photo here, but that's just because I made my cloud as a whole more dramatic. So I'm just looking for little ways of doing so. I'll have a bit more light peeking through here, but it won't be peeking through to a full extent, so I'll still make it a bit more subtle. This is just a more thin area of that cloud where light can move through a little bit more simply. And I'll connect this cloud in a way to this one and just make it look nice and cohesive. So we have the same highlights right here as we do in this, and that's why it'll look like it fits together. The same goes for this right here. I'm just going back over the edge with this more light pigment, and just like that, you can see things starting to come together. You can soften these edges. You can taper the clouds insignificantly through this technique. And again, I'm just using that tight little round motion. Okay. Heading back to my palette. Here I can see a lot of really nice little highlights coming throughout the horizon. It's almost like this darker cloud ends down here. So I'll start by just working some of these highlights down in these mountain areas, or on the edge of them rather. Remember that this is going to be more mountain yet again. We could also paint that white if we are a little bit concerned about going over it. I'm not right now, but we may a little bit later on. We'll see. Here, adding a bit more of that sky color to the bottom. And again, it'll differentiate our cloud from the sky just a little bit. For that, I'll also grab a bit more blue. That way it matches that. I just tested it up here. You can see that it barely makes a mark. So we know that the value and the saturation are all quite close. There we go. And we can blend it into our cloud if we want a softer look, or we can do more of a hard edge. We're going to do a bit more with this darker bottom of the cloud. It's a little bit too gray, a little bit too dark. Grab some extra blue, white. That's a really nice blend right there. Perfect. I'm going to take a little step back, see how it's looking. That created so much depth. I am really, really happy with that. I'm just going to go in and make it a bit more thick now. I used a relatively thin layer there initially to test it out, to see if I liked it, and I really do. So now I'm just going to go in with a secondary layer, make things a bit more prominent. I'll have this kind of work its way into the cloud a little bit, look nice and natural. And we'll continue moving this way, I think, because we have a drop off of our mountain right here, and then it will turn into this, right? Okay, I think I'll set that up, and then we will proceed. So I'm now moving over, and what I realize is this large chunk of area is sky. We didn't do this. We did the top because we were working in quadrants, but we never really started this quadrant right here. And this reference photo is for this quadrant. You can see this big patch of blue. So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to take my 1-inch flat-headed brush. I'm going to mix more of the blue that we have right here, and I'm just going to paint that in. So I'm going to begin by making sure it's nice and damp, as we do. I believe this is the blue that we used before that I have on my palette, so I'll just mix on top of that, and hopefully we come to something fairly similar. We are at the far left-hand side of the canvas, so it probably needs to be a little dark. Right now it's a hint lighter than what we had. So I'm just adding some extra Mars Black, which is, of course, doing what? It's darkening it, but it's also making it desaturated. Now, I'll get some extra blue to reincorporate that saturation. And you can see it's quite close to what we had. It's a little bit gray still, so I'll add a hint more blue. Again, a hint more. Using really small increments, that way I don't have to make dramatic changes with the black or the white. And I think that right there is a really good mix with what we have right there. So let's continue. Just going to start applying as much as I can. It's not really a large brush for this size canvas. Generally I refer to this as my larger flat-headed brush because we work on smaller canvases in the 10-minute paintings and hour-long paintings, but in this one it's really not big at all. So I'm going to need to go back a good number of times. I think I need to brighten it just a hint, especially for the top area here. And I'm doing a blend, a dry blend, because the paint that I'm applying is wet and the paint I'm applying it to is dry. But I'm using a fair bit of water to dampen my brush, and that's just allowing me to have an almost transparent, seamless look there. Again, the bottom's a little bit too dark. I think I probably just made it a little bit too light, but that's okay. You can always just readjust. And it can also just be like a softer cloud in here as well, right? So we will just continue. More of that primary blue, more Mars Black, more titanium white, and I'm just about at the point where I need to get more pigment for my palette. It's amazing how much canvas we were able to cover with what we had initially. Quite pleased. And we also applied fairly liberally. Just going to grab some more titanium white. Oh, that looks perfect. I love that. Excellent. So, just work this into the bottom. I said it was perfect. I said I loved it. I applied it to the painting. And of course, it was a little bit too dark. It's okay. It's okay. It's all just a lesson. And it's something relatively easily fixed. You can see right here, the sky ends there. It kind of touches this tree. And then it moves up from this cloud. looking at the viewfinder of the camera, that is definitely too dark. Maybe we'll try a little bit of blending on the actual canvas. So I have some blue, I have some white. See what we can do to this. There was a lot more white, so it turned it a bit more gray. What do we do when it's too desaturated? We add blue. Generally not the biggest fan of blending paint like this on the canvas, but it is a technique. Some people do prefer it, and I implore you to do whatever you enjoy, whatever makes the process fun. So that's quite nice. It almost looks like a very subtle cloud, and I think I'm going to very happily keep that. Now we can continue, and I'll actually continue using this brush for a little while just so you can see how this evolves. But look at this corner. It really looks like light's being emitted. That's because of all the very soft little watery applications of almost titanium white that we just kind of blended across there. Worked really well. But anyways, now let's work on this cloud right here. It's kind of protruding, it's up at the top, it's a good one to work on. Now this isn't actually the pigment I'm going to try to mix to. I'm going to mix to something like this, maybe just a little bit brighter. So I'm going to go back to my mixtures down here instead. Take some of this primary blue, as much titanium white as my palette has left, a little bit of Mars black, and if I don't get the color I want, I'm not going to accept what I have on my palette. I'm going to get more titanium white and I'm going to continue mixing. It's important that we don't get lazy with this. So I'll test it right here. That's a little bit lighter. That looks great. So, back up to the top. Can fill in a large portion of the middle with this if we want. We can go to the edges. And this has fairly sharp edges, so getting a soft blend is a bit more difficult, but we can always go back in with the medium-sized round-headed brush after we've applied all of our paint, because this brush will make it significantly more simple to apply a great amount of paint. So working them back and forth and kind of in conjunction is a good technique to utilize. Here I have the tops of my trees. I'm being wary of that. There we go. Grab a little more. Kind of look right here at that edge. It kind of has all of these little areas that kind of stick out like that. But of course I don't want to actually just make little Zs like that. I want to refine them, make sure that each has purpose and a point, and that I'm not just making an assumed brush stroke. I'm making them different. I'm giving them all a purpose. I say that a lot in this lesson, but when you're working on such a big painting, you have so much opportunity to make things interesting and realistic and detailed. You might as well take it. You know, it'll take a little bit of extra time, but it'll make a big difference. There we go. There we are. Can try that over here. Still looks quite nice, good. But I think that's about all we need with this brush. So I'm going to set that down. I'm going to add some titanium white to my palette, maybe a little bit of Mars black, and then we'll go in and we'll start working on the edges and highlights. We are back. I have some more white, I have some more black, and I have my water moved. There we go. We're going to come in and work on these edges right here. So I'm going to take some of my titanium white, make this a little bit brighter than what we had, a little bit of blue in there. We'll test this on our previous highlights, see how it stacks up. It's a little bit more blue, but that's actually a really nice mid-tone. Wow. Sometimes you just try things over in these other areas and then you discover something that you just really need to go back in and add to so many other places because it just works so well. There we go. Blending it, small little rotations. It's not how I intended to start this next segment, but you know what, that worked. So, Throwing it over here, again, it is more blue. It's a little bit less bright. That's okay because the actual light is quite far away. And again, we want to be able to build this up. So I'm looking at this right here. The edges are all fairly highlighted with the top ones to the greatest extent. So that's what I'm working on right now. I'm giving the top the greatest highlight. It kind of pitter-patters around here, dips in, comes back out, dips out, comes back in, and then it has these strokes that kind of go this way. And again, this is why we use reference photos. I wouldn't think to have the clouds change in this way, just naturally off the top of my head. And here are some little pieces that kind of stick out, break off. There we are. And I'm making the edges quite bright there. We can always go back and darken them should we need to. But at this point, I'm really quite happy with what we're accomplishing. I think I'll have this highlight kind of stretch out, work its way into the other one that we had. And here you can see a definitive difference between the old and the new highlight. The old one does have significantly more titanium white in it. So we'll use that as kind of a transitionary area. And then I'll work that amalgamated highlight back a little bit. There we go. Using a lot of water because we're getting into a small defined area. And when you want to work with very small applications, you want to condense the bristles on your brush, and the easiest way to do that is just add a little bit more water. Now there's a little piece that sticks off the top there. And this would hypothetically be in our other reference photo, but I'm just going to make this part my own. I have a couple of ideas on how to make it interesting. I have the general motion of the clouds, and I'm quite confident I can kind of see that through. There we go. Now I think I'm going to grab a bit more of that darker pigment and just work that along these edges, make a bit more of a transition. So you can see there. Make a bit more. Remember, even when you're mixing dark pigments, you don't need that much Mars Black. It'll still very quickly be the dominant pigment. There we go. Look at that. Trying to make it so this area of the cloud is the darkest, this area is the lightest, and then this is kind of a mid. Taking a step back, seeing how it's looking. So far, yet again, so good. And I think we'll actually take a bit of this and work it into this one as well. It's just a really nice mix, and I think it filled out that cloud and gave it significantly more depth. There we go. Now I'm starting to get a little bit of a sheen on my canvas right over here, as you can see. It almost looks like more light's emitting, but it can be a little tricky because it makes it look like this value is significantly different from this value, which it is not. They are very, very similar. The way light in the room is working, it's a little bit deceiving. But consider that when you're doing your painting, is the light kind of affecting it so that things are changing in a way you don't want to? Move around your canvas, take steps back. That will greatly aid your ability to recognize those sorts of things and work around them. Physically work around them. With that, so looking over at this one, the bottom of the cloud should have a little bit of a highlight. So I'm just going to take what we have here, create a very subtle highlight for the bottom. And again, I kind of made a lot of this up. I made it diverse, but I did make it up. So I'm going to continue with that. I've committed to making it my own. That's what I'm doing. This video is very much a lot of me saying, use a reference photo. That way you're not making it up and making it monotonous, and then me saying, here I made this part up, and here's what I'm going to do about it. And I think that's just painting. There we go. Exceptions to every rule, right? Take some more titanium white, blue, mixing up a nice highlight to continue what we have going on here. You can see how, again, this does kind of work its way out just a little bit. That's what I'm doing. Making some little round clouds as well. They don't all have to be directional, and they can kind of cluster in two directions. There we are. And then this bottom cloud will also have a bit of a highlight. So I'm starting with this highlight that, again, isn't as bright as what we have over here, but it's quite bright relative to what we have lining the bottom of the sky slash subtle darker cloud that we talked about implementing. So I'm looking at this, it kind of has this dip, which I did, and then it comes back up. And I have this little cloud that's kind of sticking out, that would be right here. That isn't in the reference photo, but I think it's a nice little detail. Then it comes back up again, and then it has a piece that sticks out. So I'll do that in the opposite direction again. So now they kind of point towards each other. It's interesting. It's a bit of duality. And I'll just start filling that in there. Now, it looks like there's a bit of sky right here, which would be right there. So I think I'll place that in first. Here we have our sky color, I believe. We needed it to be a little bit brighter and a little bit more blue, should I remember correctly. So just make that a bit brighter, a bit more blue. It's right along the bottom here, separating this cloud a little bit from the rest of it. And we'll just have this little connective point right there. There we are. We can go and fix that up later if we want to, but I'm quite happy with it. So, to proceed, I'll just fill in the rest of the bottom of this cloud. And now I'll start working down here using, again, this reference photo. So, we'll mix a darker mixture. Blue, black, white, more blue. Test it. It's a little bit dark. Add some more white, add some more blue. I think we just made it a little bit too saturated. More black. That's really nice. I think it does need a little bit more black, but it's really nice. And there we have our cloud cover. I'm using this very soft, small little round stroke for connecting the highlight and the new application. There we go. And then this will need to connect to this cloud. You can see that it is a little bit more blue, but that's okay. I'm covering up what we did before because I actually like it better. And then we'll blend downwards. I think I'm going to block this in with just this general value, and then I'll go back in and I'll add highlights to it right after. Just to kind of simplify the process, get a consistent application. Of course, that means I'm starting with blocking in the drawing, like so. Now we'll just fill it in. Remember to get the best possible aesthetic. It's this little round stroke, but if you wanted to switch to something like this brush and just fill it in really quickly, that's also an option, and it really won't make a big difference at all. There we go. Looks like a very similar color to the sky. It is. I'll just use that to taper in the sky a little bit. And then I'll move down my mountain around my trees. So I'll just mark that up here. And now we're just working in this area. So quite simple. Quite easy. Then we might want some actual sky down here. So maybe, you know what, it isn't in the reference photo, but I think I'm going to draw in some sky. So this right here will be sky. I'm going to try to get it to be a similar blue to that. And I'm going to actually mix my paint right here with my see-through palette so that I can see how close I'm going to get it. Fun technique. I found this little see-through palette on Amazon, I believe, for maybe $9, $10 Canadian, that is. And it's such a useful thing when working with reference photos. Really fun. It's plastic, so I believe I'll be able to just scrape off the paint when I'm done. But that should be quite close. I can test it. It's definitely too dark. Okay. Get some more titanium white. And you notice how I am just testing it literally on the sky? It's because it's good to not be afraid of messing things up. You can always go back and fix them and change them and do all of that. I think this is what I want. It is. Okay. Thank goodness. Now I'll apply this sky right down here. Move my reference photo just a little bit. Circular motions. There we go. I'm going to make it a hint darker just because it is farther away from the light. That's going to abandon us in our time of painting need. Not actually. I did stray from using it. I suppose this is fine. It's all fine. There we go. And now we can go back to painting more of the clouds, and should we want to brighten or darken that after, we can do that. In the meantime, I will make my darker mixture. Test it. It's too dark. More titanium white. That's also something to note. I'm consistently making this too dark, and then I fix it. Some people make things too bright and then they fix it. We're all different. We all have our innate ways of going about things, and it's important to figure out what you do. That way you can work around it and fix it. I know that I make things too dark, and so I expect to make them a little bit lighter, and that's why I am so careful with using Mars Black in my initial mixtures. You can see it's really just coming along quite quickly at this point. And I think we'll zoom in for this next little application. Now, through this view, I'm sure you can tell that there are slight changes in the blue that's happening here in the cloud and the gray. And again, I do want that. That actually is a good thing. It keeps things interesting. There are points to having some areas more blue, some more gray. With that said, because I'm using this kind of circular technique, I'm not getting a really thick application. This technique takes paint from other areas and it moves it and it blends it, and it can be great for that final texture, but it isn't the best technique for coverage. So I'm probably going to go back over a fair bit of these clouds, and in that process I might make them slightly more consistent than they currently are. Here again, working my way up the mountains. And just covering this last bit of sky here. Can take this pigment, test it over here. You can see that it's a bit brighter. And it actually makes a nice continued lip and gradient for this cloud. There we are. Now let's work right here and just move that down a little bit. We'll make some extra details, we'll add some extra light. And for that, I think I'm going to zoom out and get the reference photo back. Before we continue, I thought I would actually just quickly zoom out and give you a little look at how the sky as a whole is turning out. You'll notice that the contrast is significantly greater than what there is in the reference photo, but I think it gives it significantly more depth, and it gave us these extra interesting types of clouds. I definitely still want to go back in and really heighten the highlights that we have kind of going on here, but it's good to step back, get that perspective, recognize if things are changing, if you like the way they're changing, and then how to continue that should you want to, or how to temper it should you not want to. So just more things to kind of consider on a grand scale before we continue to re-enter into the more minute details of the piece. Now, you're not going to be able to see the water or when I'm wiping off my brush for this next shot, but we're going to work with a lot of detail in here, and I wanted you up close to see it and the reference photo. So, with that, I'm going to take that same round-headed brush, make sure that it's wet. I will still note when I am wetting the brush. I'm going to head into here, create a bit of a highlight, so I'll take some titanium white, a little bit of our blue, mix that into what we were working with. Just trying to make something a bit brighter. I'll test that on the top here, see how bright it is, and oh, that's really nice. It's not extremely bright, but it's certainly brighter than what we had. And I'm just going to work it along the areas that I feel like are protruding the most, that are kind of sticking out a little bit. And then I'm going to work inwards a little bit, because if you see down here, we have all of these little openings in the clouds. So we have one that kind of comes off from here, works its way in. There's another one right under it that moves down a little bit to the side. There's a small one right there. We have another right over here which kind of balances the sides, which is nice. Then we have some softer applications at the bottom, which is great because my brush is running out of paint. And this is a really good time to kind of just incorporate those more subtle strokes, because I can't apply as much paint or as much highlight as I could before. So there we are. Have a little bit of light streaming through that edge. And now I'm going to wet my brush, take off that extra water and paint, and I'm going to come in and I'm just going to soften a lot of these. Remember, when light is leaking through the top, generally you want to blend downwards with a lot of motion, so larger strokes. And then the top is just small little strokes. Keep it relatively sharp, or at least as sharp as the round-headed brush will allow. And this will create some really nice detail. Make it feel like the light is streaming down, illuminating the clouds it's kind of touching. But the top areas are going to remain a bit harder because that light can't come forward. It's only working its way back. And here I'm going back in and incorporating slightly more highlights in just a couple of key areas. Here I'm heading up, and I'm just creating a little bit more line work to coincide with the rest of the movement of the piece. And maybe create a bit of a softer cloud here, just by kind of dry brushing this on. Like that. Okay, so let's move over here a little bit. If I'm looking at the reference photo, I can see that this guy has this area right down here, more at the middle bottom, and it almost connects horizontally with this. So I want to create a highlight that works there. Going to create highlight in a different area, probably up here, because this is getting a little bit muddy. It has a bit too much Mars Black, and I don't have as much control there as I'd like. So I'll just grab a hint of Mars Black, wipe off the excess, create this new, nice, really bright highlight. I'll test it right here in a previously very highlighted area. Looks quite nice. It's a little blue. Make it a hint more titanium white heavy. And of course we'll need a bit of Mars Black to make it slightly more gray. Test this. And now it's brighter than it was without being too blue. So here I'm just working that across. They almost connect. There we go. I'm also making this a little bit larger and creating some areas that kind of come down a little bit. That way it looks like the light is catching multiple levels of this cloud. There we go. We do need more highlight for the bottom area here. So I'll just softly work that in, little round strokes. Just like that. Take some more titanium white, hint more Mars Black. I'll create more of a gray highlight. Grab a hint of this blue. It's a bit more subtle. And now I'll look here. I'll notice that there is a little bit of a dip, and we can have a bit of a cloud right down here, it looks like. So there's a bit of a area that comes up. There's a bit of a sweep. It follows through here, works its way into a couple of little lines there. And there are all these little pitter-patters that are kind of happening up here. And this actually leads into the highlight at the back of the cloud. Okay, so this all looks very rough, and it's intended to. That's A-okay. Let's start forming it into something. So these are actually going to be clouds that are all protruding. They are in front of this one. So the tops and the edges of them, ones that are closest to the light, are going to be a bit brighter. The bottoms are going to be softer. They're going to dissipate. Here, I'm just taking those regular brush strokes we made, softening the bottoms, blending them into one another a little bit. I'm making mine, again, a bit more dramatic than the reference photo. And that way it's consistent with the rest of the piece. There we go. I think I'm actually going to increase the highlight at the bottom here. Have that light kind of work its way down. I feel like this area is catching a lot of light just where it is. So we'll just brighten this up a little bit. Make it all look nice and soft. Much better. Actually, I really like that. That was a good change. Why don't we try that up here a little bit as well? Just softening our clouds. Again, I want it to be more dramatic. How much more dramatic is yet to be established. The more we go back in and add these full highlights, the more soft it's all going to look. I'm just trying to find where that sweet spot is. I'm also trying to reestablish some of these more blue highlights in more of a whitish gray, just because that's the color of the majority of our clouds in this one. You can see how the whitish gray highlights, though, actually stand out significantly more as opposed to the more blue ones. They can be a similar value, but the eye is just going to recognize the more white dominant values here. When the blue ones are actually really, really gorgeous and subtle. Going over a couple areas, adding extra highlights. We almost have it so this area of the painting looks a little bit stormy, where the other side of the painting looks bright, which can actually be a really fun effect. It makes the painting dynamic. It makes something happening in the sky, right? Things are ever changing. It's going to have an effect on the landscape itself. But you also don't have to do that. If you want a pure blue sky, just don't make these as dramatic. Here I'm going back and I'm making our little pitter patters a little brighter. And I might just add like a very soft wash right here too. Again, I'm just making things slightly less dramatic by taking out contrast. It's really quite bright, more so than we need. Take some more blue, black, try to create more of that color again. Just about finding that balance. Now it's darker than we want. I'm actually glad this happened, and I'm glad you got to hear me laugh about it. Why? Because I think when I started painting, when things like this would happen, I get nervous. I'd be like, oh no, I'm never going to be able to paint it that same way again. I'll never get it the way I want it. However, we wouldn't be redoing it if we actually had it the way we wanted it initially, right? So this is just a natural part of the process. It's okay, we'll make it better than it ever was. Nothing to fret about. There we go. You know what? I think that's better. Just like that. It's that easy. I'll get some nice highlight for the bottom area here. For this area right here. Create, again, a little bit more of that wispy look at the bottom that it had before. Really starting to play with the shape of it, but I like it a lot. And I think we'll also brighten the sky down here a little bit. See how easy it is to just kind of go back and touch things up? That's really what we're doing at this point with the sky. We've covered the entirety of the surface area. We're just going in, adding details, making things look how we want them to. Here I'm making this brighter again. I did it once before. And I'm just finding that balance. I'm going to take a couple steps back. I'm going to put my palette down and really think about what I want to do next, detail-wise, highlight-wise. Sometimes it's really easy to get in this kind of trap of painting and painting and painting and never really stepping back and asking yourself, what are you painting to? What's the end goal? What are we attempting to achieve here, and how do we achieve that? So that's also an important step of this. I'd recommend that you do step back, give it some thought, give it a look, and then we'll talk in probably 3 minutes my time, 2 seconds yours. So here we are, we've stepped back, we are looking at it with more of a broad view, and what I'm feeling is that this cloud right here, this one, it has this nice little secondary piece that jets out, and we had that in our initial painting, but we lost it as we went. I think I really want to go back and reincorporate that. I think I want to add a couple more little clouds here in the foreground coming out from this, and I want to establish a real difference between this cloud and this cloud. Like maybe there's this connective piece, but I want this to be a little bit darker, I want that to be a little bit lighter, and I think that is what we can do. Then maybe I'll add a little bit more of a wispy cloud in the top. But those are my goals. I've now established them. Now let's get into it. So we are heading back into this area first. I'm going to wet my brush, make sure it's damp. I'm going to try to create a gray that's quite similar to that. I would assume this is what we're looking for. I'll test it. It's quite close, it's a little bright. I'll take some Mars Black, Cobalt Blue, Titanium White. That looks quite similar. Let's make it a hint darker. And now let's throw that in. It's a little bit lighter, it's a little bit more gray. I think I'll fill in the darker areas with it, see how I like it. But I'll create that piece that kind of sticks out again. I think it needs to be a bit more blue. Take a hint of blue. That definitely tied it together significantly better. There we are. And now we did this so that we got to have more fun with the highlight. So Titanium White, Cobalt Blue, and Mars Black. I do want this to be a more gray heavy highlight than a blue heavy highlight. Like this. Using very minimal pressure with my brush, that way my bristles don't expand and I can get those nice little small applications. And then I'm kind of looking at my reference photo, finding nice little ways of tweaking it, but also making it as interesting as it is in there. It's kind of a good rule of thumb. I think when I'm changing what my reference photo is telling me to do, I'm trying to add things, generally. I'm doing what it tells me, and then I'm finding ways of making it a little bit more heightened or interesting. I'm not trying to simplify for the most part. If I really love the reference photo, that is. Generally, when you don't love your reference photo, you want to take more things out and you want to do more changes. There we are. Have so much more movement and interest going on in this area now. And I went back in and I found a lot of those blue highlights and I made them a bit more of a gray. So we changed that in a lot of good ways. Now I'm heading over here a little bit. And again, I wanted to make this stand out substantially from the larger area. So I'm adding a lot of highlight into the base here. I'm starting at the top. I'm doing this blend down. There's a large circular stroke. I'll move it up into this. See how far we get. But I'm just letting the paint run out on my brush, that way I have a very natural transition and gradient occurring. There we go. Definitely looks a lot softer, and now you have this stark difference between these two right here. And again, I'd like to note there's a bit of glare on my canvas, so this side looks like it's a bit brighter. And you know what, I can probably show you by just moving my canvas a little bit. There you go. You see it's a bit different. Changing it again this way, you can see a lot of glare. It's all about finding that sweet spot and then making sure you work in it. So here yet again is a bit more of a zoomed out look, and I want us to work with a bit of a farther back perspective for this next step because it's about filling in larger areas in context with the rest of the painting. What do I mean by that? I talked about wanting to elaborate on these, and I still want to do that because this area looks quite simple relative to the rest of the painting, and I want to give it a similar amount of interest. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take some titanium white, make that nice highlight that we've been using that's a little bit more gray heavy than blue heavy. And I'm going to apply very minimal amounts of pressure and create this secondary set of clouds in here. Again, they're not in the reference photo. These are going to be in front of the cloud that we have here. They're just going to be moseying along. And they can even go behind this one if we want. Can have them down there. I'm using a combination of these horizontal clouds as well as really small, more circular ones. I'll take that highlight and I'll incorporate it at the top here. Have it move out this way. Blend it in a little bit. If our clouds start to get lost in each other, that's not a bad thing. Just finding ways of elaborating. And you can see how this area is now quickly becoming just as interesting as this area. And so much so to the point where I'm kind of just going back into that area now. And I'm just trying to balance it. Now I'm giving this area more details. And that's why I mentioned probably about an hour ago at this point that I don't like to finish individual areas. I like to see it as a whole and then I go back and I touch it up. That way everything's being touched up at once. We have the right amount of detail in the right areas. And everything's cohesive. If I want an area to be less detailed than another area, it's because at the end that's what I decided. Not because it just kind of happened. It's doing all of these things with intent. And again, I know I'm quite far away, to the point where it's difficult to see all of the little details and markings that I'm making, but this is more, at this point, something that you should be doing with your own canvas in your own way. Because I'm sure our skies, somewhere along the way, changed a little bit. They got different, they became our own. Yours looks like yours, mine looks like mine. They're similar and they follow the same set of rules and compositions, but at this point, we probably need to touch up different areas, and that's okay. I'm creating some of these longer clouds as well. As you can see, it's pretty interesting. Head back to my palette. Adding more details back into this side again. Might brighten this cloud a little bit just by taking a very watery light gray in the same way we did to the rest. Again, watery being a key. Might even brighten this top area again. Have it kind of break apart into little pieces. It wasn't in the reference photo, but makes it more interesting, doesn't it? Just like that. Really looks like it's getting lost in the light at this point, which is not a bad thing at all. Might brighten this cloud a little bit. And see just how quickly that happens. There we go. I think I want a little bit more happening right here. And again, this is where I'm really straying from the reference photo to add my own pieces. I'm not going to add too many. I'm going to be particular. I'm going to be cautious. I don't see a lot of little ones in this area, so I'm just adding some extra little pieces. I'll blend out the back of them. I'll leave the one in the forefront a bit more noticeable. Try to continue this line work that we have going on. It's moving up that way. And then eventually this way. And we've done a lot of clouds. So at this point, they're coming along quite quickly, as you can see. Though everything still has purpose and point. Kind of connecting those two a little bit. Connect this area a little bit. Make it nice and soft. Go back and do slightly more highlights here. There we are. Very much in my own head at this point. Just assessing small little things that could be changed, fixed, addressed, different opportunities we have. But for the most part, I'm going in with those thoughts and just saying all of that about highlights. Because we have the forms that we want, we're just now at this point deciding how bright do we want cloud number 855. How bright do we want cloud number 14? They might be beside each other, right? We might not have been thinking about the 800th cloud while we were painting the 4th. Really like these wispy ones that we have kind of moving upwards right there. I think they're some of my favorites. Just filling out that cloud a little bit. Want a little bit of a sweeping cloud here, just to draw the eye back in. There we go. I think that actually made a big difference. It's amazing how such a small cloud can do that. The way it can kind of trick the eye to staying in a painting. But I think with all of that, I'd say with that being said, I've been a little quiet for the last little bit. I think all we really need to do is maybe add a little bit more of a highlight down here. Finish out this highlight that we had under this one. Like that. But I think there we have it. Let me get a wide shot for you. There we have it. I think that is our finalized sky for today. Next week, I intend to start on the mountains in the background, maybe in the foreground as well, maybe the water right down here. But that is the sky up until this point. We have a lot of clouds, a lot of gradients, a lot of detail, and we were able to do all of this because we were working on such a large canvas. Now you are able to do this lesson for sure on a smaller canvas, you just won't be able to get that same level of detail and texture that we've been working at. But please feel free to ask questions. I know that working on a large canvas does definitely it presents a whole new set of opportunities, and with those come questions. So please feel free to ask away. I am here and I'm happy to help. I'm very grateful that you do support the channel. It's because of you that I can spend time working on really big paintings like this, and that way I can take a chance and try doing one painting in a month and just seeing how much we can get done rather than kind of feeling stressed out that I have to do, 4 or 5 paintings to keep up with one each week on YouTube. So thank you for allowing this to happen. Again, without you, I could not commit to this. So I appreciate it. I hope you feel like you've learned a lot today. I think we spent about 2.5 hours on clouds in total, and I'm really, really proud of what we've done here. I might, to be honest with you, over the next week, do little touch-ups here and there. It tends to happen. I'm in my painting studio all the time and I see little areas and I want to go and I touch them up, and but it will essentially look like this come next week. I really, really, really look forward to seeing how yours turns out. If you are a member over on the Stay Creative Painting Facebook group, the one that's for alpine levels and above, please feel free to send me your progress photos, and I'd love to see this work kind of progress for all of us. I think it'll be really neat. But with that, I will see you next week with a brand new large chunk of this painting. I'm really excited. I hope you are too. And thank you. Thank you. Stay creative. Have fun. Just enjoy. I'm getting delirious. I've been talking for far too long. Okay, I'm going to go edit this video. Bye-bye.